Story 1. I called the cops every week, but no one could hear what I heard. This happened to me in 2019. I was living alone for the first time in a studio apartment just outside St. Paul, Minnesota. I had just gotten out of a long-term relationship, and this place felt like a reset. Quiet, small, manageable. It was the kind of building where you never really saw your neighbors, just the occasional door closing somewhere down the hall. It was early fall. The sun would set around 6:30, and the nights were cool enough to crack a window. I worked remotely as a transcriptionist and rarely left the apartment unless I needed groceries or had a reason to get outside. Most nights, I cooked a quiet dinner, watched something muted on my laptop, and went to bed early. I started noticing the knocking around the third week. At first, it was faint, a soft, slow knock from the far wall near my headboard. I assumed it was my neighbor. Maybe they had guests over, maybe a dog. But it happened again the next night and the one after. It was never frantic, just 3 knocks, perfectly spaced, deliberate. I'd be lying if I said I thought much of it at first, but the detail that stayed with me and kept me up was that I began to feel it before I heard it, like the knock matched the rhythm of my heartbeat. I'd be halfway between sleep and waking and suddenly jolt upright, chest tight, and then the knock would follow. It didn't feel like a sound from outside. It felt internal, like something was signaling to me. I told myself it was a coincidence, that I was just hyper-aware. But the more I tried to rationalize it, the more precise it became. Always 3 knocks, always from the same direction, always just after my body reacted. After a week, I began writing down the time every time it happened. 2:13 a.m., 1:57 a.m., 3:01 a.m. No pattern, just late, always late. Eventually I started sleeping with the lights on, a single floor lamp near the couch, warm yellow light that made the shadows easier to predict, but the knocking never stopped. And after a while, I stopped pretending I could ignore it. I called the property manager. He was polite but dismissive. Said the walls were thin, said there might be plumbing in the drywall, said maybe I was hearing something through the pipes. I nodded, wrote down what he said. Then I called the police. The officer who showed up was young. He had that apologetic look I'd gotten used to. I explained the knocking, that it matched my heart, that it felt personal. He said there was no sign of forced entry, nothing out of the ordinary. He even chuckled a little when I asked if anyone had reported similar complaints. He left after 10 minutes. I watched his cruiser pull away through the peephole. Then I turned back toward the apartment, and the knock happened again. That night, I moved the bed to the opposite corner of the studio, away from the wall where I heard it most. I didn't sleep. I sat upright on the futon until sunrise. The next day, I tried something different. I placed a glass of water on the floor where the knock usually came from. Then I waited. Nothing happened for hours, just the usual hum of the fridge, the soft creak of the window frame. Then, at 2:16 a.m., I felt the cold return to my chest, and the glass tipped over slowly, like someone nudged it from below. There was no spill. The glass had been empty for an hour. A few days later, I began sleeping with earbuds in. Just static, pink noise, something to drown out everything else. It worked for a while, or at least gave me the illusion of sleep. But one night I took the earbuds out halfway through the night. I don't remember why. I just remember waking up with the sudden need to hear my own surroundings again. The apartment was still, that heavy, unnatural kind of stillness you only notice when something is about to change. And then I heard it, a whisper, coming from the corner vent above the stove. At first, I couldn't tell what it was saying. Just soft syllables, repeated slowly. A woman's voice. Familiar. Too familiar. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just listening. And then it said my name. Not calling it. Not asking. Just stating it. Repeating it. Like a phrase with no meaning except sound. It didn't stop. My name over and over. Not whispered with urgency, but with rhythm, the way you might hum to yourself when you're alone. I stepped closer to the vent. It was one of those older aluminum ducts, half covered in chipped white paint. I pressed my ear to the grill. Still the same voice, still mine. I backed away. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even sit. I stood in the kitchen until morning, watching the vent, waiting for it to stop. The next day, I unscrewed the vent cover with a butter knife. Inside was a dark shaft that dropped downward, probably into the wall between units. I shone my phone flashlight inside. There was nothing, just a smear of dust and wire insulation. I called maintenance again. They said they'd check it out in the next 2 weeks. I didn't wait. That night I recorded the vent. I placed my phone against the grill and let it run from midnight to dawn. When I played the file back, there was nothing for hours, just silence. Then around 2:45 a.m., a low hum, followed by a single word. My name. Not spoken exactly, more like shaped. I deleted the file, not because I didn't want proof, but because I didn't want to keep hearing it. A few nights later, the whisper changed. It no longer said my name. Instead, it started saying other things. Just one phrase repeated, "She's listening now." I called the police again, same response, same notes, same kind of officer who smiled without meaning it. No one else had heard anything, no one else had complained, nothing they could do. I started leaving the apartment during the night, just sitting in my car until sunrise. It was the only way I could guarantee quiet. But even there, I could still feel it, that low echo in my ribs, like someone breathing from inside me. There's a term I learned from an old psychology article, low verifiability phenomena, events that can't be disproven but also can't be confirmed. Not hallucinations, not exactly, just experiences that only exist in the space between people. Alone, they're unbearable. Shared, they're dismissed. That was my life for 3 months. By the end of it, I barely ate. I forgot what silence felt like. I didn't trust the floor to stay still. I stopped opening the fridge. I didn't want to hear it breathe. Then one day I moved out. It was unceremonious. I packed a few boxes, left the furniture, didn't even clean. I dropped the keys off in an envelope marked, "Do not rent." I knew it wouldn't matter. And then the knocking stopped. Not gradually, not in echoes. It just ceased. Like someone turning off a metronome that had been buried in the walls. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. I didn't think about the place again until 6 weeks later, when I got a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. It was a woman's voice. Calm, shaky. She said, "Hi, I think you used to live in Unit 3C. I'm so sorry to bother you, but something's been happening. I don't know who else to ask." She paused, then added quietly, "She won't stop saying my name." She didn't explain who she was. She didn't have to. I never called her back. I blocked the number. I didn't want to know if the knocking had changed direction. I didn't want to know if it had learned new names. Some nights, I still wake up at 2:14 a.m., chest tight, heart pounding. But now, the silence is worse. Because now, I don't know what I'm not hearing, and some sounds don't want to be heard. They want to live inside you. Story 2. Someone kept sending me photos from inside my house, and police said the locks were fine. This started for me in early 2022, not long after I bought my first house. I had just turned 30, moved from a small apartment in the city out to a quiet suburb in central Ohio. It was a modest split-level brick exterior, one of those leftover 80s builds with wood paneling in the basement, and a kitchen that still smelled faintly of dish soap, no matter how often I cleaned. The house came furnished. The previous owner had passed, and her children didn't want most of it. Nothing fancy, just a table set, a few chairs, some faded armchairs, and a pale green couch with a permanent sag in the center. It wasn't my style, but it saved money. I told myself I'd replace things one at a time, but months passed and I never did. The first envelope arrived in March. No return address, no markings. Just cream cardstock inside a plain white envelope slid through the mail slot while I was at work. Inside was a single printed photo, glossy 4:6. It showed the living room, my living room, taken from the far corner of the room where the floor lamp stood behind the old couch. The photo was dark, as if taken without flash. I could see the sag in the couch, the coffee table slightly off-center, the glass ashtray I didn't use but hadn't thrown out. Every detail matched, but nothing was missing. I stared at it for a long time, turned it over. No markings, just faint printer banding on the back, no note. My first instinct was to check the locks. Everything was secure. I had deadbolts on both doors, and I always kept the windows shut. The basement windows were those high, narrow kinds, barely big enough for a raccoon. Still, I checked every room, opened every closet, looked under the bed. I felt stupid while doing it, but I couldn't stop myself. When I called the police, they sent over a patrol officer. He was polite, a little skeptical, but didn't dismiss me. I showed him the photo. "Could it have been from the listing photos?" he asked. I shook my head. The couch had a red throw blanket now, draped over the back. It wasn't there when I moved in. The blanket was in the photo. He nodded, but his tone changed. "Okay, but nothing stolen? No damage to the locks?" "No, but someone was inside." He wrote a report. Said they'd keep an eye on things, suggested I might want to install a camera system. I asked if he'd take the photo in for evidence. He said, "There's not really anything to test." It was the way he said it, not unkind, just procedural, that told me nothing was going to come of it. The next photo came 4 days later. Same envelope, same style. This time, it was my bedroom, taken from just inside the door. Captured the bed, unmade as I'd left it, and my nightstand with the book I'd been reading. The photo had been taken during the day. I recognized the sunlight slanting in through the blinds. Still, nothing stolen, no signs of entry, no open windows, no messages. But it was mine, undeniably. The angle, the light, even the slight tilt of the ceiling fan blades. It wasn't a stock photo. Someone had stood in that room and taken it. I installed cameras that night. 2 Nest cams, one facing the front door, one pointed at the hallway that connected the living room, kitchen and bedrooms. I signed up for the subscription plan to get footage history. I checked the app constantly. For a while, nothing happened. No new envelopes, no notifications. I convinced myself it was over. A prank, maybe. Someone who had access from before I moved in. Maybe they'd moved on. Then came the third photo. This time, it was the bathroom. The mirror showed my toothbrush, my towel on the hook, a bottle of aftershave sitting just off-center. I hadn't cleaned the mirror in weeks, and the streaks matched. But what shook me wasn't the content. It was what I hadn't noticed before. In every photo, something had changed slightly. In the first, the red throw blanket was draped differently. In the second, the nightstand book was closed, even though I always left it face down. And in this one, the towel had been flipped to the other side of the hook. Whoever was doing this wasn't just entering, they were watching closely enough to mimic, then deliberately disrupting, but never stealing, never damaging, just changing, displacing. I tried to show the new photo to a different officer. She told me they couldn't prove the photos weren't staged, that unless there was damage or a forced entry, there wasn't enough for them to open an investigation. She used the word non-criminal. I remember standing in the hallway that night, trying to explain it out loud to no one. "It's not about what's gone," I said. "It's that nothing is." After the third photo, I stopped leaving the house at all unless I had to. Groceries, gas, quick drives. I started working remotely again, citing health reasons. I left the hallway light on all night and placed empty glasses near the door like tripwires, but nothing ever triggered the cameras. No movement, no sound alerts, no unexplained clips. Then one night, I woke up around 3:30 a.m., thirsty. I got up and checked my phone, out of habit. The camera app showed no alerts. Still, I decided to scroll back through the motion events manually. There was one listed at 1:14 a.m., about 2 hours prior. It showed nothing unusual, just me turning off the living room lamp before heading to bed. But then I opened my email. There, time-stamped at 1:09 a.m., was a new message from a burner address. No subject, no text, just one image attachment. It was the kitchen, taken from above, maybe standing on a chair. It captured the counter, the sink, the fridge, my coffee mug from earlier that night, my keys. I opened the camera app again and rewound to 1:09. Nothing, no motion, no intrusion. I watched every frame. I checked the time on the app. 1:14 a.m., 5 minutes after the email had been sent, which meant whoever took that photo had already been in the house before I checked. They weren't caught on camera because they'd already left, or they never left. It wasn't just a photo, it was a delay. Something, or someone, was inside, watching the cameras, timing their presence around the blind spots, or worse, they weren't avoiding the cameras, they were overriding them. The idea crept in slowly, like cold water around your ankles. This wasn't just intrusion, it was orchestration. The photo wasn't just taken, it was scheduled, sent with precision to arrive just after the moment passed, to avoid detection while confirming presence. I ripped the cameras down that night, not because I didn't want surveillance, but because I no longer trusted it. I didn't want to keep checking a system that might be lying to me. I called the security company the next morning and cancelled everything. They asked if I wanted to give a reason. I told them no. Because how do you explain that the system you installed to keep something out was now confirming it was already inside? I stopped sleeping in the bedroom after that. I moved a pillow and blanket to the couch and slept with the TV on, volume muted. I started writing down every change I noticed, every moved object, every open cabinet, every unfamiliar sound. But the worst part was the absence of anything definitive. No threats, no demands, no signs of forced entry, no laws broken. Just the ongoing presence of someone who never took anything except certainty. I tried to file another report. This time, the officer I spoke with actually sounded empathetic. But when I asked what could be done, she sighed and said, "We can't act unless there's a clear criminal offense. I know this is upsetting, but technically your locks are secure and there's no evidence of entry." I asked, "So someone can send me photos from inside my house, and as long as they don't steal a TV, it's not a crime?" She didn't answer. That weekend, I boarded up the vents, every one of them. I nailed them shut. I stuffed them with towels and sealed them with duct tape. Then I called a moving truck. I didn't pack most things, just clothes, a few books, my laptop. I left the furniture, left the house key on the counter, moved 3 towns over, rented a small apartment with second-floor access, no mail slot, no crawl space, no basement. The first week was quiet. Then, on the 8th day, an envelope arrived. Same kind, white, unmarked, slid under the door during the night. Inside was a single photo, my new kitchen, my fridge door, open, and nothing missing. Story 3. They told me the man I described died 2 years ago. This happened to me in 2020, when I was working part-time at a neighborhood grocery store just outside of Baton Rouge. It was one of those regional chains, low ceilings, 2 bright lights, the same elevator music loop every day. I worked the early morning shift starting at 5:30 a.m., helping with restocking and checkout until noon. The store was quiet during those hours. Mostly older customers, a few early risers grabbing coffee and bread. There was a rhythm to it, familiar faces, same greetings, same small talk. I liked it that way. There was something grounding in knowing what each day would be. I first noticed him on a Tuesday. He was tall, maybe late 60s, with a windbreaker zipped all the way to his neck. Pale blue, his face was lean, clean-shaven with a sharp jawline and dark eyes that didn't blink much. He walked with a slight limp. His shoes were always the same, soft black soles worn near the toe. He didn't smile, but he always nodded when I greeted him. That morning, he came through checkout with a single item, a can of tomato soup. I remember because it was the only time I saw him buy something. He placed it gently on the counter, paid in cash, and said, "Same time next week." I smiled. "We'll be here." He left. I didn't think about it again until the next Tuesday, when he returned at exactly the same time, 6:47 a.m., and bought the same item. Again, no smile, just a nod. This continued for weeks, always on Tuesday, always at 6:47, always the soup. Eventually, I started keeping a tally behind the counter. It became a kind of joke with the stock guy, Marcus. We'd see who could predict the exact second he'd appear at the end of the aisle. One week, he didn't come. The clock hit 6:50 and I felt wrong, like someone had moved a chair I always leaned on. But the next Tuesday, he returned, same item, same nod. I told him jokingly, "You had us worried." He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "You're kind to notice." That was the only time he ever spoke a full sentence. Then one morning, a new manager, Dave, called a meeting before shift. Someone had been stealing, he said. Small things, soup cans, condiments, a few dollars short on a register here and there. When I mentioned the man, Dave cut me off. "Tall guy? Windbreaker? Limp?" I nodded. He frowned. "Jess, that man died 2 years ago." I waited for the punchline. There wasn't one. "He had a heart attack, right in aisle 5. We didn't find him until morning. You must be thinking of someone else." I felt embarrassed, not just because I'd been wrong, but because I felt seen in the wrong way, like I'd misremembered something basic. I brushed it off, told myself it was a look-alike, or maybe I'd heard the story wrong. But that same afternoon, while restocking, I found a receipt, wedged behind the register drawer, folded small. It was dated March 4th, 2018, 2 years earlier, paid cash. Item, Campbell's tomato soup. Total, $3.13. Clark, ID, blank. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't just the item, it was the timestamp. 6:47 a.m., aisle 5, the same aisle where they said he collapsed, the same aisle where the lights flickered at random, the same aisle where I started to feel, over time, like someone was standing behind me even when the store was empty. There's a scent I've never been able to name properly. It's not decay, not mildew, something older, like air that's been trapped behind drywall for too long. Salt, dust, old iron. I started noticing it every time he came in. At first I thought it was the windbreaker, maybe it hadn't been washed in a while, but the scent always lingered after he left, in the aisle, by the counter. It clung to the register scanner for hours. It was faint, dry, not unpleasant, but wrong, like something that had been preserved too long. The kind of smell you remember from childhood basements, from hospital stairwells, from the inside of old cash boxes. One morning after he left, I followed the smell back to aisle 5. It was strongest near the soups. I stood there, alone, and closed my eyes. The sound of the store disappeared, the beeping, the humming. What was left was that scent, and underneath it, something else. Breathing, not loud, not sharp, but near. I opened my eyes. The aisle was empty. I leaned down, checking the lower shelves. Something caught my eye. The price tag for the tomato soup was still on the shelf, but we hadn't carried that brand in months. A new display had replaced it. The tag read $3.13, even though the shelf above it now held a different soup, priced at $2.49. I asked Marcus about it. He frowned. "We changed that whole section last fall," he said. "Must be an old tag we missed." But the label was fresh. No dust, no fading. The next week, I brought it up to Dave. He said I needed to take fewer early shifts, that maybe I was burnt out. So I stopped saying anything. I kept working, kept watching the clock on Tuesdays, and every week at exactly 6:47, he returned, nodded, paid in cash, took the soup, left, and every week the smell followed him. I started spraying Febreze near the register after he left, but the smell stayed. It got into the keypad, the rubber mat behind the counter, the mesh on my shoes. One night, I woke up at home and smelled it in my bedroom. Just for a second, then it was gone. After a while, I stopped tallying the visits. I didn't tell Marcus, I didn't mention the scent, I just watched, because I started to understand something. It wasn't an interaction, it was a loop. He never changed. Same coat, same limp, same exact movements. Same place on the counter, same hand reaching into the same jacket pocket for folded bills. One Tuesday, I swapped out his soup can before he arrived. I replaced it with a different label. Same size, same shape. I made sure it was the only one on the shelf. At 6:47 he came in. He walked past the shelf, didn't pause, turned, walked back, then stopped. He reached forward, picked up the can, tilted it once in his hand, then placed it back. He looked up at me. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Then he turned around and walked out. The next morning, the register was 313 over. No one knew why. It became a pattern after that. Every Tuesday, no matter who was on shift, the register reported threes. 13 over after the morning count, even if no one rang up a purchase at 6:47, even if no one came in. I tested it once. I printed a report from the register log. It showed no transaction at that time, but the drawer had 1 extra 5 and 2 missing ones, as if someone had made exact change. We stopped using cash for morning purchases soon after. Then came the audit. A higher-up from corporate visited to investigate a pattern of minor register discrepancies. He wasn't interested in ghosts or scent trails or repeating timestamps. He wanted answers. He pulled me into the back room. "Tell me," he said, "do you know anything about this item?" He held up a can of soup. Dusty, old logo, faded label. It wasn't from our store. The barcode didn't match. The brand had been discontinued in 2019. I told him I didn't know. He nodded. "Funny thing," he said. "We found it in the break room fridge. I didn't ask who put it there. I didn't ask why it was cold." After that, I started seeing him less. Some weeks, he didn't show at all. But the overage remained. Every Tuesday, $3.13. Even now, years later, I still check the receipt tape when I'm at the store. Sometimes the timestamp will read 6:47, but the Clark ID will be blank. The lights above aisle 5 still flicker, just once around that time. No one's been able to fix it. They replaced the fridge, scrubbed the shelves, took out the price tags, renovated the floor. But sometimes, when the AC shuts off for a moment and the store goes quiet, I catch it again. That scent, salt, dust, old iron. And for a second I see him, just ahead of me, at the end of the aisle, not walking, just waiting.